The divorce papers sat on the mahogany desk like an accusation. Alexander Cross, CEO of Cross Industries and one of the world's most powerful billionaires, drummed his fingers against the polished wood, his jaw clenched with barely contained fury. She refused to sign, his lawyer, Marcus said carefully, adjusting his wire-rimmed glasses. Again? Alexander's eyes, cold, calculating gray that had stared down corporate giants and government officials, narrowed dangerously. What reason did she give this time? Marcus shifted uncomfortably. The same as before. She said, and I quote, "I still believe in us." A bitter laugh escaped Alexander's throat. Believe in us? There is no us. There hasn't been for 3 years. He stood abruptly, his 6'3" frame casting a shadow across the office as he moved to the floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking Manhattan. Below, the city pulsed with life. Millions of people scurrying about their insignificant lives while he stood above it all, or at least he used to feel that way. His marriage to Elena had been strategic from the start. She was the daughter of his father's business partner, beautiful and cultured, the perfect trophy wife for a man building an empire. For the first 2 years, they'd played their parts admirably, attending galas, hosting dinner parties, presenting the image of the perfect power couple. But somewhere along the way, Elena had made the fatal mistake of wanting more. She'd started talking about slowing down, about starting a family, about connecting and being present. Alexander had built his empire by being ruthlessly focused, by sacrificing everything personal for professional gain. He didn't have time for sentimentality. The marriage had grown cold, their conversations reduced to logistics and schedules. They lived in the same penthouse but occupied different worlds. For the past year, they'd barely spoken beyond what was necessary. Alexander had assumed Elena would be as eager as he was to end this charade. He'd been wrong. "She can't keep me trapped in this marriage," Alexander said, his voice low and dangerous. "I want this done, Marcus. I don't care what it costs." "Alexander, if you push too hard, she could take you to court. New York is an equitable distribution state, and given the length of your marriage and her contributions—" "Contributions?" Alexander spun around, his eyes blazing. "What contributions? I built Cross Industries from the ground up. Every dollar, every deal, every success, that's mine. She was your wife through all of it. A judge might see it differently." Alexander's phone buzzed. He glanced at the screen and felt his blood pressure spike. It was Victoria Chen, the stunning investment banker he'd been seeing discreetly for the past 6 months. She was everything Elena wasn't. Ambitious, driven, uninterested in emotional complications. She understood that power was its own reward. "I have to go," Alexander said, grabbing his coat. "Draw up new papers. Increase the settlement offer if you have to. I want my freedom, Marcus. Make it happen." That evening, Alexander met Victoria at an exclusive rooftop restaurant where privacy was guaranteed and paparazzi were kept at bay. She looked stunning in a black dress that cost more than most people's monthly salary. Her dark hair swept up to reveal a neck adorned with diamonds. "You look tense," Victoria observed, sipping her martini. "Wife still being difficult?" "She'll come around," Alexander said, though his grip on his whiskey glass betrayed his frustration. "She's just being stubborn. Or maybe she actually loves you," Victoria said with an amused smile. "Some women are foolish that way." Alexander didn't want to think about love. Love was a weakness, a distraction. He'd seen his father's empire nearly crumble because of a messy divorce. Alexander had sworn he'd never make the same mistake, yet here he was, trapped by a woman who refused to see reason. His phone buzzed again. This time it was a text from Marcus. "She wants to meet with you. Says it's important. Tomorrow, 2 p.m., the penthouse." Alexander stared at the message, then showed it to Victoria. "Maybe she's finally ready to sign," Victoria suggested. "Maybe," Alexander said, though something in his gut told him it wouldn't be that simple. Elena had never been predictable, and lately she'd been more distant than ever. He hadn't seen her in person for 2 weeks. Tomorrow, he decided, would be the end of it. One way or another, he would have his freedom. The penthouse felt different when Alexander entered the next afternoon. The space that had once been filled with Elena's warmth, fresh flowers, soft music, the subtle scent of her perfume, now felt sterile and hollow. She'd removed most of her personal touches over the past months, leaving behind only the expensive furniture and art that looked perfect but felt empty. Elena was standing by the window where he'd stood just yesterday, her back to him. She wore a simple cream-colored dress that seemed to hang looser than he remembered. Her honey blonde hair fell in soft waves down her back, and for a moment, Alexander felt an unwelcome pang of something he refused to identify as regret. "You wanted to meet," he said, his voice deliberately cold and businesslike. She turned slowly, and he was struck by how tired she looked. Dark circles shadowed her green eyes, and her normally glowing complexion seemed pale, almost fragile. For 3 years, he'd barely looked at her, really looked at her. Now seeing her like this, something twisted uncomfortably in his chest. "Thank you for coming," Elena said softly. Her voice, once bright and musical, carried a weight he'd never heard before. "I'm a busy man. Elena, if you have something to say about the divorce, why are you so eager to throw away 6 years? She interrupted, her eyes meeting his. "What did I do that was so terrible? Was I not beautiful enough? Not charming enough at your business dinners? Did I embarrass you somehow?" Alexander's jaw tightened. "This isn't about you. It's about moving forward. We're not happy. Haven't been for years." "You're not happy," Elena corrected. "You decided we weren't working without ever asking me. You just left. Emotionally, physically, in every way that matters. You checked out of our marriage and expected me to do the same. And yet you won't sign the papers," Alexander said, his frustration bleeding through. "Why? Why hold on to something that's already dead?" Elena's eyes glistened, but she didn't cry. She'd stopped crying over him months ago. "Because I made a vow, Alexander. For better or worse. I know that means nothing to you. Vows are just contracts to be broken when they're no longer profitable. But they mean something to me." "Sentiment," Alexander said dismissively. "That's all this is. Romantic delusion. Is it so delusional to believe that the man I married is still in there somewhere?" Elena asked, taking a step toward him. "The man who once stayed up all night with me talking about dreams? Who laughed? Who actually felt something?" "That man was young and stupid," Alexander said harshly. "He didn't understand what it takes to build something real, something lasting. Success requires sacrifice." "What have you sacrificed, Alexander?" Elena's voice rose, emotion finally cracking through her composed facade. "Really? You've sacrificed nothing. You just chose your empire over everything else. Over me, over us, over any possibility of actually being happy instead of just being successful." "I am happy," he said, but the words felt hollow even as he spoke them. "Are you?" Elena challenged. "You're drinking more. You barely sleep. Marcus told me you snapped at the board last week over nothing. You're hollow, Alexander. And you think getting rid of me will fill that void, but it won't. You'll just be hollow and alone." "I'm seeing someone," Alexander said, the words designed to wound. "Victoria Chen. She understands me in ways you never did." He watched the pain flash across Elena's face, but she recovered quickly. When she spoke, her voice was steady. "I know about Victoria. I've known for months. Did you think I wouldn't find out? I just didn't care enough anymore to fight about it." The admission stung more than Alexander expected. "Then why won't you just sign?" Elena walked to the coffee table and picked up the divorce papers. For a moment, Alexander thought she might actually do it, finally end this stalemate. But instead, she held them against her chest. "Because 3 months ago, I would have signed these without hesitation," she said quietly. "I was ready to let you go, to accept that I'd married a man who would never love me the way I loved him. I was ready to move on with my life. Then what changed?" Alexander demanded. Elena's hand moved to her stomach in an unconscious gesture that Alexander didn't notice in his agitation. "Everything changed, but you're not ready to hear it. You're too angry, too focused on what you think you want to see what you actually need. Don't psychoanalyze me, Elena, just sign the damn papers." "No." Her voice was firm now, resolute. "Not yet. There's something you need to know first, but I won't tell you like this. Not when you're looking at me like I'm just another obstacle to overcome." Alexander felt his control slipping. This was not how this was supposed to go. He was Alexander Cross. He didn't get outmaneuvered by anyone, especially not by a wife he'd already discarded in his mind. "You can't keep me trapped forever," he said, his voice low and threatening. "I will find a way out of this marriage with or without your cooperation." "I'm sure you will," Elena said sadly. "You always find a way to get what you want. But you might want to ask yourself, when you finally get it, will it be worth what you lost? She set the unsigned papers back on the table and walked past him toward the bedroom. At the doorway, she paused. I'll be out of the penthouse by the end of the week. I'm moving to the Connecticut house. When you're ready to actually listen, really listen, you know where to find me. Then she was gone, leaving Alexander alone in the sterile penthouse with unsigned divorce papers and a growing sense that he'd just made a terrible mistake. 2 weeks later, Alexander was in his office reviewing quarterly reports when his phone exploded with notifications. Text messages, emails, calls, all coming in rapid succession. He ignored them at first, focused on the numbers in front of him. But the persistent buzzing finally broke his concentration. He grabbed his phone and saw dozens of messages from business associates, board members, and social contacts. Most contained the same thing: a link to a gossip website with a headline that made his blood run cold. Cross Industries CEO's estranged wife, spotted with mystery baby, secret love child. The photograph loaded slowly, each pixel feeling like a knife to Alexander's gut. There was Elena, standing outside what looked like a doctor's office in Connecticut, holding a newborn wrapped in a blue blanket. Her face was turned toward the baby, her expression so tender, so full of love, that Alexander felt like he was looking at a stranger. The baby couldn't have been more than a few weeks old. His mind raced, doing calculations. 3 months since their confrontation, 9 months before that. His hands tightened on the phone until his knuckles turned white. Victoria burst into his office without knocking, her face flushed with barely concealed fury. "Alexander, have you seen—" "Get out," he said quietly. "Excuse me?" "Get out!" His voice was dangerously soft. "Now." Victoria's eyes widened at his tone, but she was smart enough not to argue. The door closed behind her with a soft click, leaving Alexander alone with the photograph that was currently destroying his carefully constructed world. He enlarged the image, studying every detail. Elena looked thinner than before, tired but radiant in the way new mothers often did. The baby's face was partially hidden, but Alexander could see tiny fingers curled around Elena's thumb, a shock of dark hair peeking from beneath a blue cap. His phone rang. "Marcus." "Tell me that's not what I think it is," his lawyer said without preamble. "I don't know what it is," Alexander replied, his voice hollow. "Alexander, if that baby is yours, everything changes. The divorce, the settlement, custody, I said I don't know." Alexander ended the call and immediately dialed Elena's number. It went straight to voicemail. He tried again, and again. On the 4th attempt, she answered. "Hello, Alexander." Her voice was calm, almost eerily so. "Is it mine?" The words came out harsher than he intended. "Is that baby mine?" There was a long pause. In the background, he heard a soft cooing sound that made his heart constrict painfully. "You had 6 months to ask me that question," Elena said finally. 6 months where I tried to tell you, tried to reach you, tried to make you see me as something more than an inconvenience. You wouldn't listen." Elena answered the question. "Is that child mine?" "His name is Alexander James Cross, Jr., she said quietly. "Everyone calls him AJ. He's 3 weeks old, healthy, and absolutely perfect. He has your eyes, your stubborn chin, and your habit of furrowing his brow when he's concentrating on something." The room tilted. Alexander gripped the edge of his desk, the polished wood suddenly the only solid thing in his spinning world. "You were pregnant," he said, the realization crashing over him like a wave. "That day in the penthouse. That's what you were trying to tell me." "I was 3 months along," Elena confirmed. "I'd found out a few days before. I wanted to tell you in person. Wanted to see if maybe, just maybe, a child might remind you that there's more to life than mergers and acquisitions." "Why didn't you just tell me anyway? Why the cryptic messages and the—" "Because you were too busy looking at me like I was your enemy." Elena's composure finally cracked. "You were standing there telling me about your mistress, acting like I was some obstacle to your happiness. How was I supposed to tell you about our son when you could barely stand to be in the same room with me?" Alexander's legs gave out. He sank into his leather chair, the photograph still glowing on his phone screen. "A son. He had a son. I want to see him," he said. "I want to meet him." "No." The single word hit him like a physical blow. "What do you mean, no?" "He's my son. You can't keep him from me." "I can't," Elena agreed. "But I won't let you waltz into his life when you're ready, and then disappear again when he becomes inconvenient. I won't let you treat him the way you treated me, like he's only valuable when he serves your purposes. That's not fair. Fair? Elena laughed, but there was no humor in it. You want to talk about fair? Let me tell you about fair, Alexander. Fair is being pregnant and alone because your husband is too busy with his empire and his mistress to notice. Fair is going through morning sickness while reading about your husband at charity galas with another woman. Fair is giving birth to your son with only your mother and a nurse present, because the baby's father couldn't be bothered to return your calls. Each word was a hammer blow, cracking the armor Alexander had built around himself. I didn't know. You didn't want to know, Elena corrected. There's a difference. I tried to reach you, Alexander. I called, I texted, I sent messages through Marcus. You ignored all of them because you were too focused on your divorce and your new life. I want to make this right, Alexander said, surprising himself with the rawness in his voice. Tell me how to make this right. I don't know if you can, Elena said softly. AJ deserves a father who will actually be present, not just financially but emotionally. He deserves someone who will show up for school plays and scraped knees and teenage heartbreak. Can you be that person? Or will he just be another item on your calendar? Another obligation to manage? The accusation stung because it was true. Alexander had spent years reducing everything to assets and liabilities, costs and benefits. Even his marriage had been more merger than romance, but this was different. That tiny face in the photograph, those small fingers, that was his son. His legacy. Not his company or his wealth, but an actual human being who carried his name in his blood. Let me prove it to you, Alexander said. Give me a chance to show you I can be the father he needs. You wanted your freedom, Elena reminded him. You wanted this divorce so badly you were willing to pay anything for it. Well, congratulations, Alexander. I'll sign your papers. I'll give you exactly what you asked for. But AJ is not part of the negotiation. You want to be in his life? You'll have to earn it. The call ended, leaving Alexander staring at his phone, at the photograph of the woman he'd discarded and the son he'd never known existed. For the first time in his adult life, Alexander Cross had no plan, no strategy, no clear path forward. All he had was the crushing weight of his mistakes and the desperate need to fix what he'd broken. But this wasn't a hostile takeover or a contract negotiation. This was his family, and he had absolutely no idea where to start. The Connecticut house sat on 5 acres of pristine land, a far cry from the Manhattan penthouse Alexander had called home for the past decade. He'd bought it years ago as an investment, a weekend retreat that Elena had lovingly transformed into a real home. He'd rarely visited, too busy, too important, too many demands on his time. Now standing at the end of the long driveway in his Tesla, Alexander felt like a stranger at his own property. It had been a week since the photograph went viral, a week since his world had tilted on its axis. In that time, Alexander had done something he'd never done before. He'd canceled meetings, postponed conference calls, and pushed back deadlines. Marcus had been shocked. The board had been confused. Victoria had been furious and ultimately had ended their relationship, calling him domestically compromised. Alexander hadn't cared. For the first time in years, something mattered more than Cross Industries. He got out of the car, his designer shoes crunching on the gravel driveway. The house looked different in daylight, warm and inviting, with flower boxes in the windows and children's wind chimes tinkling on the porch. Elena's touches were everywhere, evidence of a life she'd been building without him. Before he could knock, the door opened. Elena stood there wearing jeans and a soft sweater, her hair pulled back in a simple ponytail. She looked younger somehow, more like the woman he'd married 6 years ago than the trophy wife she'd been forced to become. You came, she said, not quite a question. You said I could visit? Alexander held up a bag from an expensive baby boutique. I brought some things. I wasn't sure what he needed. Elena's expression softened slightly. He has everything he needs, Alexander. But you can come in. The house was even more transformed than Alexander had expected. The formal living room he remembered had been converted into a cozy space with a bassinet, a rocking chair, and shelves filled with books and soft toys. Baby blankets draped over the furniture, a mobile with stars and moons hung from the ceiling. This was a home. Not a showplace, not an investment property, a real home where a child was being raised and loved. He's sleeping, Elena said quietly, leading him to the bassinet. He usually naps around this time. Alexander approached slowly, his heart pounding in a way that had nothing to do with business pressure or deal-making anxiety. When he looked down into the bassinet, the breath left his lungs entirely. His son was real. Not just a photograph on a screen, but an actual breathing, living baby. AJ was tiny, his little chest rising and falling steadily, his rosebud mouth slightly open in sleep. He wore a blue onesie with tiny elephants on it, and his dark hair stood up in an adorable cowlick. Alexander had closed billion-dollar deals without his hands shaking. He'd faced down hostile board members and aggressive competitors without flinching. But looking at his 3-week-old son, Alexander's hands trembled. "Can I—" His voice cracked. He cleared his throat. "Can I hold him?" Elena studied him for a long moment, then nodded. "Sit in the rocking chair. I'll bring him to you." Alexander sat, feeling awkward and massive in the delicate chair. Elena gently lifted AJ from the bassinet, and the baby made a small, protesting noise before settling back into sleep. She carefully placed the baby in Alexander's arms, adjusting his grip. "Support his head," she instructed softly. "There, like that. You're doing fine." But Alexander didn't feel fine. He felt terrified and overwhelmed and completely inadequate. AJ weighed almost nothing, barely 7 pounds of warm, breathing life. Alexander could feel the baby's heartbeat against his chest, steady and trusting. His son. This was his son. "Hi, AJ," Alexander whispered, the words feeling foreign and natural all at once. I'm your father." AJ's eyes fluttered open at the sound of his voice, gray eyes exactly like Alexander's own. The baby stared up at him with the unfocused intensity of a newborn, and something deep in Alexander's chest cracked open. This tiny person would depend on him, would learn from him, would become who he was in part because of Alexander's choices. It was more responsibility than any boardroom decision, more important than any merger or acquisition. "He looks like you," Elena said, sitting in a nearby chair. Her voice held none of the warmth it once had, but the hostility was gone too. In its place was a careful neutrality. "Everyone says so." "He has your nose," Alexander countered, studying his son's face. "And your chin." They sat in silence for a while, watching AJ sleep. Finally, Elena spoke. "I signed the divorce papers yesterday. They're on the kitchen table." Alexander's head snapped up. "Elena, you wanted them signed." "They're signed." Her voice was matter-of-fact. "You're free, Alexander. Just like you wanted. That was before you knew about AJ?" Elena's eyes flashed. "So what, now that there's a baby, you want to stay married?" "That's not how this works. I won't be something you keep around for convenience or appearances. I won't raise our son in a loveless marriage just so you can present the right image to your shareholders." "What if it's not about appearances?" Alexander asked, surprising himself. "What if I was wrong?" "About what?" "The divorce? Our marriage? Everything?" Elena laughed bitterly. "You made your choice, Alexander. You chose your empire. You chose Victoria. You chose everything except me." AJ stirred in Alexander's arms, his tiny face scrunching up. Elena immediately stood, ready to take him, but Alexander instinctively began rocking, the motion somehow natural despite his complete lack of experience. The baby settled, his expression smoothing back into peaceful sleep. Elena watched, something unreadable crossing her face. "I want to be in his life," Alexander said firmly. "Really in it. Not just visits and child support. I want to be his father." "That's easy to say now," Elena said. "But what about in 6 months when the novelty wears off? What about when he's up crying at 3 a.m.? What about when you have an important meeting and he has a doctor's appointment? What about when being a father interferes with being a billionaire?" "I'll figure it out," Alexander said. "I know I don't deserve your trust. I know I destroyed any faith you had in me, but he didn't ask for any of this. He deserves a father who tries." "Trying isn't enough," Elena said, but her voice had lost some of its edge. "He needs consistency, reliability, love." "Then teach me," Alexander said quietly. "I don't know how to be a father. I had a terrible example. You know what my father was like. But I can learn. I will learn. Just don't shut me out, please." Elena was quiet for a long time. When she finally spoke, her voice was thick with emotion. "Do you know what the worst part was? It wasn't the mistress or the cold shoulder or even the divorce papers. It was the fact that you stopped seeing me. I was in the same room as you, and you looked through me like I was invisible. Like I didn't matter. I won't let that happen to AJ. I won't let him grow up wondering why his father can't be bothered to notice him. I see you now, Alexander said, meeting her eyes. And I see what I almost lost. What I did lose. Elena, I don't expect forgiveness. I don't expect you to take me back or give me another chance at being your husband. But let me try to be his father. Let me prove that I can change. People don't change, Alexander. Not really. Maybe not, he admitted. But priorities can change. Mine have. AJ chose that moment to wake up fully, his face turning red as he began to cry. A surprisingly loud sound from such a small body. Alexander panicked, looking to Elena for help, but she remained seated. You wanted to be his father, she said. He needs a diaper change. Changing table is upstairs. First door on the right. Diapers, wipes, and cream are all there. Alexander stood carefully, holding his crying son against his chest. I've never changed a diaper in my life. Good time to learn, Elena said, though her expression softened slightly. I'll be here if you need help. But try first. Alexander climbed the stairs, his son's cries echoing through the house. The nursery was painted a soft blue, with a mural of clouds and birds on one wall. The changing table was indeed stocked with everything he needed, though he had no idea what most of it was for. Okay, AJ, he said, laying the baby down carefully. We're going to figure this out together. It took 15 minutes, 3 false starts, and a near disaster involving misdirected baby powder, but eventually Alexander managed a passable diaper change. AJ stopped crying somewhere in the middle of the process, apparently fascinated by his father's incompetent struggles. When Alexander came back downstairs, carefully carrying his clean and much happier son, Elena was watching from the doorway. Was that almost a smile on her face? Not bad, she said. You put it on backwards, but it'll hold. I put it on backwards. The tabs go in the back, Elena explained, taking AJ and fixing the diaper with practiced ease. But you tried. That's something. Alexander knew that something was a long way from forgiveness or trust. But it was a start, and for the first time in years, Alexander Cross understood that building something real, a relationship with his son, perhaps eventually reconciliation with Elena, would require a different kind of work than building his empire. It would require patience, humility, and the willingness to fail and keep trying anyway. It would require him to become a better man than he'd been. Looking at his son's face, Alexander knew he would do whatever it took to earn that title. Not billionaire, not CEO, father. 3 months had passed since the photograph changed everything. Alexander had spent more time in Connecticut than Manhattan, learning the rhythms of parenthood that couldn't be managed from a boardroom. He'd learned that babies didn't care about quarterly earnings reports, that 3 a.m. feedings happened whether you'd slept or not, that a smile from your son could make the exhaustion bearable, even meaningful. That love wasn't a weakness but a different kind of strength, one he'd been lacking his entire adult life. The board hadn't been happy about his reduced hours. Alexander had stepped back from daily operations, delegating more authority to his COO and appearing via video conference for all but the most critical meetings. Some members had grumbled about his domestic distractions. He'd replaced them. Cross Industries hadn't collapsed without his constant attention. That was perhaps the most humbling revelation. The empire he'd sacrificed everything to build didn't actually need him hovering over every decision. It had good people, solid systems, and momentum of its own. Now on a crisp November morning, Alexander sat in Elena's kitchen. He still couldn't think of it as his house, feeding AJ a bottle while Elena made coffee. This had become their routine over the past months. He'd arrive early, help with the morning feeding, spend the day learning to be a father, then reluctantly return to Manhattan in the evening. The divorce papers remained unsigned on the kitchen table, gathering dust. Neither of them had mentioned them in weeks. He's getting so big, Alexander marveled, watching AJ's gray eyes track his face. At 3 months old, his son was becoming a real person, smiling, making sounds, gripping Alexander's finger with surprising strength. The pediatrician says he's in the 95th percentile for height, Elena said, bringing over 2 coffee mugs. She sat across from him, and Alexander noticed she looked different lately. Less guarded, more like the woman he'd married. He's going to be tall like you. Poor kid, Alexander said, and was rewarded with one of Elena's rare smiles. You're good at this, she observed, watching him handle their son with increasing confidence. Better than I expected, honestly. Low bar to clear, Alexander acknowledged. But thank you. They'd been civil these past months, co-parenting with careful courtesy. But there was something else growing between them. Not the cold marriage of before, but not quite friendship either. It was tentative and fragile, like a seedling pushing through frozen ground. Alexander, Elena said suddenly, her voice serious. We need to talk about the future. The arrangements. You can't keep living in two places, and AJ needs stability. We should formalize a custody agreement. Alexander looked down at his son, then back at Elena. This was the conversation he'd been dreading and anticipating in equal measure. What if there was another option? He asked quietly. What do you mean? Alexander set down the bottle and carefully lifted AJ to his shoulder, patting his back gently until the baby burped. 3 months ago, he wouldn't have known to do that. Now it was second nature. I've spent the past 3 months learning to be a father, Alexander said, and in the process I've been remembering how to be a human being. Not a CEO, not a billionaire, just a person who cares about something beyond profits and power. That's good, Alexander, really. But what does that have to do with, I was wrong, he interrupted. About everything. About what matters. About success. About you. He met her eyes, holding her gaze. I spent years treating our marriage like a business arrangement that had outlived its usefulness. I was wrong about that too. Elena's expression shuddered. Don't do this. Don't use our son as an excuse to— I'm not, Alexander said firmly. AJ made me stop and look at my life, yes. But he didn't create my feelings. He just finally made me acknowledge them. He paused, searching for words he'd never been good at expressing. I was so focused on building an empire that I didn't realize I was building a prison. And I locked you out because I was afraid. Afraid of what? Of needing someone, Alexander admitted. Of being vulnerable. My father taught me that emotion was weakness, that attachments were liabilities. I built my whole life around those principles. But they were wrong. I was wrong. Elena's eyes glistened, but her voice remained steady. You can't just decide you want me back now that it's convenient. That's not how love works, Alexander. I know. That's why I'm not asking you to take me back. Alexander stood, still holding AJ, and crossed to the kitchen table. He picked up the divorce papers with his free hand and brought them back to Elena. Sign them. She looked confused. What? Sign the papers? And our marriage. Alexander's hand shook slightly, but his voice was clear. Because whatever we build from here, if we build anything, it needs to be real. Not held together by paperwork or obligation or even by our son. It needs to be a choice. Your choice. I don't understand, Elena whispered. Alexander carefully transferred AJ to her arms, then knelt beside her chair, a position he'd never imagined himself in, the great Alexander Cross on his knees. I can't ask you to forgive me for the years I wasted, for the pain I caused, for choosing everything else over you, he said. But I can tell you that I finally understand what I lost. You weren't convenient or decorative or useful to my image. You were the one real thing in a life full of shallow successes. Tears were streaming down Elena's face now. Alexander, I love you, he said, the words feeling both strange and absolutely right. I don't know when I fell in love with you. Maybe at the beginning, maybe gradually, maybe the moment I saw you holding our son. But I love you, not because you're the mother of my child, not because divorce would be inconvenient, but because you're brave and stubborn and you believed in us even when I couldn't. You hurt me, Elena said, her voice breaking. So much for so long, I know. And I'll spend the rest of my life trying to be worthy of you if you'll let me, but not as your husband, not yet. As someone trying to earn your love, not someone entitled to it by marriage. Elena looked down at AJ, who was contentedly playing with her hair, then back at Alexander. You want to date me? After 6 years of marriage? I want to court you, Alexander corrected. I want to take you to dinner and actually talk to you. I want to learn what makes you laugh. I want to build something with you instead of just coexisting in the same space. And if someday you think I've proven myself, maybe you'll give me the privilege of being your husband. Really your husband, not just legally. This is insane, Elena said, but she was smiling through her tears. You're already the father of my child. We already have history. You can't just rewind to the beginning. No, Alexander agreed, but maybe we can start fresh. No expectations, no obligations beyond AJ. Just two people figuring out if they can build something real together. Elena was quiet for a long moment. AJ gurgled happily, grabbing at both his parents with his tiny hands as if trying to pull them together. "And if I say no?" Elena asked softly. "If I decide I can't trust you again?" "Then I'll respect that," Alexander said, though the thought made his chest ache. "I'll be the best father I can be to AJ. I'll honor whatever custody arrangement you want. And I'll spend my life grateful for the gift you gave me by refusing to give up on me, even when I'd given up on us. You really have changed," Elena said wonderingly. "Or maybe I'm finally becoming who I should have been all along." Alexander reached out and gently wiped a tear from her cheek. "I can't promise I'll be perfect. I'm still learning. But I promise that you and AJ will always come first. The empire can run itself. My legacy isn't Cross Industries, it's him. And maybe, if I'm very lucky, it's us." Elena looked at the divorce papers in Alexander's other hand, then at their son, then back at Alexander's face. She saw something there she hadn't seen in years: vulnerability, hope, and genuine love. "Put those papers away," she said finally. Alexander's heart leaped. "Elena, I'm not signing them, but I'm not burning them either." She smiled, a real smile that reached her eyes. "They're going in a drawer. Consider yourself on probation, Alexander Cross. You want to court me? Fine. But you're starting from zero. You'll have to work for every smile, every trust, every bit of my heart you want back." "That's fair," Alexander said, feeling lighter than he had in years. "And you'll come to our son's pediatrician appointments, all of them." "Absolutely. And you'll learn to cook because I'm not doing all the domestic work while you play weekend father. I'll take lessons. And you'll go to therapy. Real therapy, not just attending because I asked." Alexander hesitated at that one. The idea of sitting on someone's couch talking about feelings was terrifying. But he looked at his son, at Elena's determined face, and nodded. "I'll go to therapy." "Then we have a deal," Elena said. "Now your son needs a nap and I could use a shower. Think you can handle him for an hour?" "I've got this," Alexander said, taking AJ back carefully. The baby immediately settled against his chest, making Alexander's heart swell. As Elena headed upstairs, she paused and looked back. "Alexander, ask me to dinner sometime. Somewhere nice. And actually show up on time. How about Friday?" he called after her. 7 o'clock. "I know a place with incredible Italian food and a view of the water. We used to go there before you forgot how to be human," Elena supplied with a soft smile. "Friday works. But you're paying, obviously." After she disappeared upstairs, Alexander sat in the rocking chair with his son. Through the window, he could see the vast grounds, the garden Elena had planted, the tire swing she'd hung from the old oak tree. "This house had everything his penthouse didn't. Warmth, life, love. You know what, AJ?" Alexander whispered to his sleeping son. "Your mother is the smartest, strongest, most infuriating woman I've ever met. And I'm the luckiest man alive that she's giving me a chance to prove I'm worthy of her." AJ made a contented sound, his small hand curling around Alexander's finger. 6 months ago, Alexander had wanted freedom. He'd been willing to pay anything, sacrifice anything to escape a marriage he'd seen as a trap. Now holding his son in a house that finally felt like home, with a second chance he didn't deserve but would treasure, Alexander understood what he'd been too blind to see. Freedom wasn't the absence of commitment. It was having something worth committing to. His empire would continue. Cross Industries would thrive or fail or evolve without him micromanaging every decision. But this, his son's breath against his chest, Elena's laughter from upstairs, the messy, complicated, beautiful reality of family, this was his real legacy, and he would spend the rest of his life making sure he didn't lose it again. Outside, the autumn leaves fell in golden spirals, marking the end of one season and the beginning of another. Alexander watched them through the window, rocking his son, and allowed himself to hope. Hope for forgiveness. Hope for redemption. Hope for a future built not on power and control but on love and second chances. It wouldn't be easy. Elena wouldn't make it easy. She shouldn't. But Alexander had never backed down from a challenge when something truly mattered, and nothing had ever mattered more than this.